I have 3 high schools. One is an alternative high school, and they are currently doing tier 3, so they're doing really good stuff there. I'm not too worried about them. My 2 comprehensive high schools, the place that we seem to be struggling with is when we get to that FBA BIP piece and how to make that work at the high school level, who's doing it, who has the skill set to do it, is the biggest question. A lot of times the special ed teachers are hesitant just because of their caseloads, and our student services people are so overwhelmed right now with everything that's going on at this time of year that they get hesitant right about February and March. They all kind of like shy away when more things to do come up. So that's kind of where we're at with tier 2 and probably my biggest concern.
Yeah. So I hear I've jotted down who's doing it, who's actually got the skills to do it, and this is kind of around that briefish or the lower level FBA VIP planning, like not the super complex crisis kinds of needs, right?
The simple BIP, FBA, the brief, whatever word you want to put in front.
Whatever qualifier. And is there, like, are there any questions in terms of like the who, or past the who, are there questions you have in terms of like the process or the what, or do you feel like you guys have a good process down but you just need to find the right people to do it?
I think we have a good process. I'm very familiar with FBA VIP, so I go in and work with the teams when they get to that point. It's just who's doing it and who has the, who can. Yeah. Once I get that there, how do we get the system implemented and running? We're more at point A, before we're even looking at trying to get the systems running at a good level.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for clarifying that for me, because I think one of the questions I've gotten from many schools this year, K-12, has been how to make the brief, like how do we actually pare it down from, something that's typically been done as a part of a special education referral, multiple points of data, observations, several months to collect, the right information and analyze it and come up with a plan, or not several, but 1 or 2, maybe 60 days, you get the timeline. So that's helpful that you kind of called out more about like the who could we actually tap into doing that. That makes sense. So welcome. Go ahead.
I was going to say, when I was at the alternative high school, we had a handful of kids that got to this point, so I was able to kind of streamline some of the forms if they're coming to that point. So the forms that I've got, it's the whole, the who piece.
The who, yeah. All right, cool. Thank you. Did I say that correctly, Stephanie?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, hi, I'm Stephanie Burry. I'm from Quincy, Illinois. I am the district PBIS coach for Quincy Public Schools and all of Adams County, which is about 23 schools. We have 5 high schools and 2 alternative schools that I am helping facilitate Tier 2 interventions. And we are really struggling with check-in, check-out and how we can get everybody to participate who needs to participate, students and adults. How can we, who's running those? Because we know we need somebody who is going to provide some positive to those kids in the morning, but even that constant feedback, during class periods.
Yeah. So I hear kind of like, how do we get everybody doing their job from a staff member's perspective, like bought in, maybe there's an element of buy-in, wanting to do it, but then also knowing how to do it and doing it effectively?
Yes, and using the importance of collecting the data on the DPR.
Yeah, okay.
The kids don't want to carry it, So, we're talking about doing something electronically, but then that eliminates that conversation with the student from the adult. And that's what we really focus on. But if we put it electronically, then that eliminates that kind of conversation.
Yeah.
Our FEIGs. We have groups also up and running, but again, it's how do we collect that data and get that feedback to those students who aren't wanting to carry that card.
Yes, absolutely. A common concern. And I think you're right, Stephanie, that it's great that you guys have looked at electronic means of collecting that data. It's discreet, it's kind of behind the scenes, but then how do you provide that prompt for the adult to still give that feedback throughout the day so that that the student's not missing that. It's not just like at the end of the day they suddenly get this email, hey, you got 20 points today. Well, what does that even mean? And where did I miss the boat? And where did I rock it out?
Exactly.
The other thing I will say, Stephanie, we will come back to this check and check out question. The other thing, Stephanie, welcome. My college roommate was from Quincy, Illinois. So I'm excited that you're on. That's great.
My husband just took a job in Appleton, Wisconsin, so I will be moving there this summer. But I'm still trying to get, my schools, to be more diligent about working with Fidelity. So I was cruising your site, so I appreciate you letting me come on this webinar.
Of course, that's great. Well, welcome to Appleton. It's a great little town. So I think we should go back to one of these questions. And if this is just the PowerPoint from last time, so I'm gonna just flash this up. Last time we did talk about check-in, check-out and student buy-in. How do we gain that? How do we find some solutions? There was some discussion around progress monitoring on electronics like iPads using a QR code. Some schools were using a QR code. Staff turnover, staff buy-in came up last time. That kind of goes back to Stephanie's question as well, like that staff were providing the feedback, but they weren't doing the sheets or collecting data. And then let's go to this next piece and see if there's anything on the brief FBA. There was questions around SAG, admin and staff turnover for Tier 2, progress monitoring Tier 2. Okay, so the brief is kind of the newer portion, the brief FBA. But check-in, check-out were similar. And I don't remember if a couple people on the call this morning were at the conversation last time, which is why I just wanted to bring us back to that. So I do have a few slides prepared, but mainly because, just as a landing point, I'd much rather just facilitate a discussion if everybody's okay with that. I think we have some, just knowing a couple of the people and seeing them at trainings and networkings and all that kind of stuff. We've got some really amazing skills on the call today, so I'd rather hear from everybody here about what they're doing to get everybody to participate in check-in, check-out, and then maybe move to that brief FBA conversation about who's doing it, who's got the skills. So check-in, check-out. How can we get everybody to participate? What do we do to get that staff buy-in? I'm gonna separate this out here, and we're gonna work through this. So we've got two things on the table. We've got the staff buy-in, feedback, and data, which are all kind of sort of related. And then we've got the student buy-in. And I think within that is the critical feedback, like the receiving the feedback, the opportunity to process. How are people making that work? Do you mind sharing out like what you've seen work in terms of staff buy-in and or student buy-in with your intermediate and high schools with check-in, check-out?
Excuse me. All right, the staff buy-in piece at the middle school is a little bit easier, just because the the intermediates are set up in a house system, so they have a smaller number of teachers. There's less movement among students and staff, so it's a little less of issue there. I'm trying to think. I think I have 4 middle schools. 2 of them are using the iPads as their tracking device, and the student scores are shared with the student, the parent, and then the greeter. And as part of their system, it's expected that as the teacher is filling that piece out, they're having that conversation just like they would have with the sheet, but they do it with the iPad instead. And that all feeds into a beautiful Google form, and then all that is they can run it by student, and they can run it by whoever's on check-in, check-out as well. At the high school level, I believe they're using the iPad piece as well. Still struggling. There's a good share of teachers who are bought into it and will provide that feedback, and then we're still some who, oh yeah, no, they'll fill it at the end of the day, and it's not as clean as we would like it to be. At the alternative school, it's almost become a hybrid of a check-in, check-out, and more of a kind of a mentoring piece. Some of the kids will do the point sheets. Some of them are like, I'm not doing that, but I will come in and check in with my preferred adult, so to speak. And that has had impact on, as well, as far as being reflected within their data of referrals. At the alternative school, they track everything, and they make all their choices off majors and minors. So there's a lot of data there. And at the alternative high school, a lot of it's a much smaller staff, so they have it's easier to communicate between teachers, and that whole student-teacher relationship is easier to build and expand on. So I think I covered everything. Need me to expand on anything?
No, it was great. Thank you, Dave. I appreciate it. Yeah, so I heard some electronic, but like it sounds like if I've got the right picture in my head, a teacher is still standing with an iPad, in hand, or nearby, and providing the feedback before or simultaneously entering the data.
Correct. It's
so
the
that
same. Yes.
Yeah, so that essentially it's the same thing. It's the expectation that even though you're doing it electronically and maybe off to the side, teachers are still providing that feedback. It's
Correct.
And that's critical. So what did you do in terms of did you see a barrier at the beginning in your district, Dave, with teachers wanting to provide that feedback, or understanding how to do that, or did people just kind of naturally know how to do it and you were good,
The feedback piece is definitely something that, in my mind, is an ongoing challenge. It used to be that whole, we still have some teachers that we struggle with it, but it used to be that whole, instead of just giving that real short, specific feedback, they try to make it into that teaching moment and kind of escalated things, especially if the student was having a bad day. But now that we've been doing it for a couple years and we've gotten that process more refined in how we present it to staff, has become more refined. It's gotten better. But we still have some teachers who resist it, or just 1, 0, 2, bye, have a good day. They don't really give that constructive or positive feedback. nothing, or they go on their little soapbox, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
That's not as prevalent as it used to be, but we still have some teachers, and it's typically the newer teachers that struggle with that piece.
Interesting. Really?
Yes.
That's fascinating. Okay. Anybody else regarding student or staff buy-in? To kind of address that question, what people have done. Sounds like Tarika and Deborah, you guys are here from Madison mainly to learn because you don't have too many high schools right now that you are supporting with this. And Stephanie, what about, sorry, go ahead. Who just chimed in?
It's Stephanie from Quincy. How many days,
Awesome.
how many people do you have on check-in, check-out in your high school? Or how big is your high school?
The alternative high school is about 250 students, and that goes. There's within that there's two components. There's the traditional day high school, I guess you'd call it. They go from say 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning to like 2 o'clock, and then after that they actually have night school that goes from 2:30 to 7:30, and that entails about 250 kids. My two comprehensive high schools are about 1,500.
And how many do you have on check-in, check-out?
Trying to go to one high school, I think they're around 15 to 20.
Okay. We our data decision rules are pretty extensive. Our teachers don't want to take off, or our teams don't want to take off the academic piece, the attendance piece, the behavioral piece. So they have all these data points, and I think currently right now in the Quincy Senior High, there's 150 kids that fall within that data decision rule. And that's a number that is not, and we have close to 1,500 kids. So it's trying to, you know, look at changing our data decision rules, because I think that would also, you know, help staff and not be too overwhelmed with the number of kids that they might have on check-in, check-out. So what kind of data decision rules have you come up with?
They base it off of I'm gonna speak about one high school. That way I'm not getting my systems confused. No, it's a comprehensive high school. It's about 1,500 kids. They have it set on, I believe it's their majors. If the student receives, I believe it's 3 majors, period. And then when they get to that point, they get to their Tier 2 team, and then that's actually a hybrid of their academic and behavior teams, and they have that conversation around what's the best fit for that student. And then if they decide check-in, check-out is the best route to go, then they set them up with a greeter and set up that process from there. But it's at that point, it's straight up just behavior data. They do look at the attendance data, so if like the student's never there, they say let's worry about the attendance piece first. But if the student has good attendance, et cetera, all right, maybe check-in, check-out is the best route for the student, and they go from there.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions related to that? I think that's a good point. I mean, it does, Stephanie, like you said, it goes back to your decision rules, your data decision rules. And it is really overwhelming to think, wow, could we potentially be serving 150 kids? You know, and what was the total population of your school, Stephanie?
We have 1,500 in our 10, 11, 12th grade.
1,500. So yeah, I mean, I guess like over the course of the year, could you eventually, maybe not now, but eventually be serving that number of students with a lower level or a couple of lower level tier 2 interventions like check-in, check-out?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think,
that makes
go ahead.
That makes perfect sense to serve 1,500 kids in a low-level tier 2 intervention for the 9 months. But to pull the data, last week or 2 weeks ago and say, okay, we have 150 kids that meet our data decision rule, we've got a problem.
Right. Yeah, I mean, to do that overnight would be just a logistical and efficiency challenge, to say the least. Yeah. Tarika just added a question. She's wondering how many greeters would you have? How many greeters do you have for check-in, check-out at your high school, Stephanie?
Well, currently the students are picking up their DPR, or talking to their first hour teacher.
Okay.
Because, that's how, I mean, it was easiest for us to do because we had people that had to, be on duty, and we were trying to rearrange greeters. I think like at our junior high, which is the same, we have 10 greeters, but and they have about they should have about 100 kids on check-in, check-out, so that's giving the greeters 10 each. But currently our high school is picking them up from their first hour and then turning them in their last hour.
Okay. So that's just kind of naturally happening within the classroom environment?
Yes.
Okay.
But then the problem comes in, the student comes in late, comes third hour, and then the third hour teacher gets on their little soapbox saying, I'm not going to give you a DPR if they're responsible for not being here for first hour. And so again, we get on that big, huge power struggle that just sets the student off.
Yeah, what happens when the student's late and teachers want to, they want to use that as their pound of flesh opportunity, or they want to use that as their opportunity to say, nope, not going to do it, like, you're late.
Because our expectations are to be respectful, responsible, and engaged, and when a student is late, then they want to say, well, you weren't responsible.
Gotcha.
Then, or if let's say they lose their sheet, they won't give them another one to show that they were irresponsible.
Right. Yeah, and so I think that's a really big question, right? Like, what is the intervention? What is the purpose of the intervention, and what supports do we need to put in place? And my question kind of goes along with Tarika's question that she just chatted, like, what kind of training or support is given to the teachers around that check-in, check-out? Because I think, so often we focus so heavily on the practice, the intervention, and what's needed to get that up and running. And then so what's happening on the front end and throughout the year to provide that support or ongoing conversation with staff?
All staff has been trained. We go through practice a couple times a year. But again, you have those staff members who just won't do it.
Mm-hmm. And so what do you do when a staff member won't do it? And Dave, this question goes back to you too. Like, is that okay? What's the system response for a teacher that won't do it?
In Quincy, the admin acknowledge that there is a problem. However, they don't necessarily always address it.
Mm-hmm.
So our team is trying to continue to do that PD and help support, but how do you get, I guess how do we just get the teachers to do it so that it doesn't have to have admin intervene?
Yeah, this is a critical question. How do we get teachers to do it without admin involvement?
And we continue
or kind of
to try to acknowledge the teachers who are doing it. You know, we're providing, you know, gift cards or drawings, or, you know, we're trying to give all the positive to all the teachers who are doing it, but we still have a group of teachers that just, they won't do it, and a lot of our kids are in those teachers' classes.
Right. And if we could get more teachers doing it and participating effectively, providing adequate corrective feedback, we could potentially serve more students and get to that 10% number over the course of the year, right?
Yeah. Yes.
So here's where I'm going to take a little detour. If you guys are okay with this, I'm going to, I really believe that these sessions should be a give and take from everybody. So I'm just going to take a little detour for a second and talk about this, because this is a critical issue, not just for check in, check out, but for the other tiers of, or the other practices or interventions we might layer in with Tier 2. I think it's critical at Tier 1, but, you know, Tier 1, I guess sometimes some of the buy-in, the capacity, the, yeah, I guess just the buy-in. Sometimes the buy-in issues resurface when we start implementing or when we're tweaking our Tier 2 practices. So here's the deal. And Liz Paczynski, I know you are on this call, so you better chime in. Anybody else as well? I just am shouting out to Liz because she and I have had a conversation about this recently. We just did some support for some districts in my region kind of regarding this, this issue of buy-in. And, you know, buy-in really comes back to two things. Like, one, the what's in it for me question, and the question of, like, you know, what's going to be the benefit for me individually? And that's a challenge because you have to think about it, your team, your Tier 2 team or your Tier 1 team or your leadership team, whatever team in your building is trying to roll out some type of new practice or refine something, they can't just think about it in terms of we can't just think about it in terms of the collective, you know, or like what does this department need, or what does this hallway need, a grade level, or overall I think my staff might need this. We need to actually think about those individuals, and different people are going to be in it for different things. And so going back to kind of what you've tried at Quincy, Stephanie, that positive reinforcement might be one thing to motivate some adult behavior. But then digging deeper into seeing, like, well, if our positive reinforcement is not working for everybody, why is that? And taking a look at those individuals. What is in it for me? And what benefit am I personally going to get out of this? If I try this and do this, what's going to be the benefit to me? And then the other piece past that what's in it for me is how confident do I feel in making this change? Like, do I actually feel like I can do this? And, you know, the research has come back to this. And I'll give you guys a resource to explore at your leisure after this. Stephanie, I know you've used this resource too, so chime in. But it really comes back to, like, you know, do I see the importance? Like, do I see what the benefit will have on me personally in my day? And then do I actually believe that I can do this? Do I have the skills? Do I have the right knowledge? Do I feel adequately prepared? Et cetera, et cetera. And this research actually comes from, this research on buy-in and motivating, motivational interviewing kind of stuff really comes from, has its roots in therapy for people with addiction issues, like AODA type of stuff. And so, and it's actually created, if people are familiar with like brief motivational interviewing, and just being able to kind of put stuff out there and say like, well, would you be willing to try this? Or would you be able to give this a shot? And having an opportunity to pass out information beyond training, kind of have some low-level information available. And then, if people are still not biting, like, well, kind of digging more deeply into that.
Stephanie, and I've heard districts and schools say that sharing their data and the outcomes of supports has helped with buy-in at Tier 1 and Tier 2.
Okay.
I would agree with that. I've done data walks with some of my teams, and that has seemed to increase buy-in and understanding and all of that among the staff, and then that in turn has, in my opinion, created a higher buy-in and interest from the staff as a whole around the PBIS systems. And I think also leadership is a key piece, especially at that Tier 1 piece. Somebody at the staff who's willing to follow and work with, that makes a huge difference as far as that buy-in piece.
Tarika said there hasn't
Thank you,
been,
guys.
oh, sorry, Emily. Tarika chatted that there hasn't been enough time given to training, and it is hard when working with people with different belief systems.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's very true, because the beliefs are really, at the core, right? Like there's such a deeper level there to work with in terms of, I always said when we started Tier 1 in my first district, as soon as you start talking about behavior, you're starting to uncover people's deeply held beliefs on behavior that maybe they didn't even know they had. And so we're kind of having to go there again with Tier 2. So here's a resource. I just chatted it in the box. If you want to, in the chat box, if you want to copy and paste that into your browser and watch it later, it's a very brief video. I'm not going to play it now, but it really talks about like, what does the research show about readiness? This comes from the Active Implementation Hub, which is a part of the National Implementation Research Network. This is kind of a geeky love of mine. I go back here for resources, but lately this seems to be coming up quite a bit. And it might help to further some thinking either for you as an individual or with your team about thinking how to support your team with readiness for change. And when we have individuals who are not participating in check-in, check-out, or staff members who don't quite see the value in it, then they're really at the beginning stage of that change. They haven't quite made it, and they're still searching for the what's in it for me piece, or how can I actually do this and feel supported. There's some other resources on there that again might be helpful for you to think about. What do my people need when we really talk about buy-in? Okay, so in the last 10 minutes we've got here, I do want to go back to this question Dave had put on here relating to the brief FBA. Who's doing it, who's got the skills?
We call them our brief FBAs.
Okay, so can you talk through what that looks like, who does it, and what your process looks like?
Right now we have we train some special ed teachers. They're kind of case managers, and they help with that brief FBA. And it doesn't have to be a special ed student, but they're the ones, because they do our complex or our higher level FBAs. they help gen ed staff with those FBAs coming up with, you know, the ABC, and then trying to come up with those replacement behaviors versus the desired behaviors. You know, we all know what we want them to do, but then how do we get that, that replacement behavior taught so we can get to that desired behavior?
Awesome. Thank you. So with the ABC portion, what do you guys do? Do you have teachers completing ABC charts, or?
Yes. We have them fill out. If they have, if we've come to a student who has met our brief FBA data decision rule, we will hand out a quick questionnaire to teachers. You know, as I'm thinking high school, you know, there's going to be multiple teachers that will fill out this, the ABC, and it's just looking at if there's any patterns in what the different teachers are seeing. Because when we talk about our brief FBA, we're talking about one behavior when they're not a threat to themselves or somebody else. So if they're having struggles all day long, but the behavior is only, you know, coming in or staying in their seat or coming in on time, then we'll do a brief FBA with them. Because we're looking for one behavior, and it could be over multiple time slots, but we don't want to do multiple behaviors at one time.
Yeah, I think that's the key. I think that's one of the biggest hang-ups. Like Tarika chatted, that it's hard to get people to think outside of the context of IEP FBA, because at that point we're looking at multiple behaviors, multiple environments, and like you said, Stephanie, like we really need to pare down. If this is going to be a brief support plan, we've really got to pare that down and focus on one or two. And if there are multiple going on, that's just maybe a brief isn't going to cut it, right? Like it's just not going to be enough.
Yeah, and you know, we always say that if somebody's doing a brief FBA, that person doesn't even need to know the student. We're looking at what the teachers are saying with the antecedent, the behavior, and the consequence, and then we look at patterns of behavior that takes place, like with referrals, and that anybody then could write that brief FBA BIP, because it's general enough, and you know, we don't have to be student specific, because we're looking for replacement behaviors based on patterns of their referrals. So if it's a time of day, then we're looking to see, you know, maybe putting them on check in, check out, but then reteaching who's doing what. And, you know, the difference between our brief and our complex is there is no safety plan or crisis plan on a brief. And again, it's one basic behavior. So finding that basic behavior that we want to change maybe across multiple time periods.
Yeah.
I have a question
That's a good.
for Stephanie. Stephanie, what amount of training do you provide to your teachers that are around the ABC so that they can complete that?
I provide, every year we do a FBA BIP training. I think it's like 3 days, 4 hours. So it's like 12 hours that we do a core group of teachers. And so there's some from every building that comes. And then I provide a PowerPoint or a overview that those people then do with their staff on anybody who might have a student that they need to do this with. And one of our schools did they call it an FBA writing party, and they took the whole team that came to our training, and then those people took people underneath their wing. And these people were all special ed teachers, so they had they were familiar with the FBA BIP, but they took gen ed teachers then and helped them learn how to find the A's, B, and C, and then to help write those FBA BIPs so that special ed teachers weren't trying to do them all.
That's an interesting concept, that like your special ed teachers are really supporting the gen ed teachers, but through this writing party, it's kind of like a gradual release of responsibility. You know, that like Like, we'll hold your hand in the beginning, but eventually the expectation is that you do this on your own. But we'll do it together now, you know. I like that.
And there's some that'll, they'll come 3, 4, 5 times because they're, they don't feel comfortable yet, which is fine. But then we're getting those brief FBAs up and going. We're collecting data so that we don't get to that Tier 3 intervention. We're trying to, we're doing a lot with the staff to help with that, so that we don't have to go to that complex where it's more than our psychosocial workers working on our complex or our special ed FBA VIPs.
That's great. In terms of the who, what are some other characteristics that you'd want to look for in people who could actually get this done? Like, I like the idea of building the support and capacity for the gen ed teachers to be able to do this on their own or do this within collective teams. Are there other common characteristics that you see or could think of for people to be able to do this work, I guess I'm trying to break out of the mold that it has to be a specific role, right? Because I know some school psychs that would just totally get this and know this and love this and want to do this all the time, and then some psychs that would be like, maybe they don't feel super confident. And same thing with like social worker, counselor, or teachers. Like, I love the idea of building the teacher's ability to do this. Or other people within the building, not just the traditional special ed pupil services, but how to do that and how to get there is a little bit different. People got at least a nugget that they can take out of this morning to help further their implementation. I think we kind of covered the two ends of the intervention spectrum within Tier 2 with the check in, check out, and the brief FBA VIP discussion. I really appreciate everybody's willingness to just chime in. I think with the high schools, I think what seems to be helping is just having this continued conversation and bouncing ideas off of each other, because I think that piece of making it real and relevant to high school kids and high school teachers is super critical. I mean, it's important K-12, but it seems to be even more critical to have an active lens on at the high school level. So I know people have a busy day probably in front of them. I want to be able to end on time and let you go, but I appreciate you all chiming in. Dave, have a great day, great weekend just down the road from me. Stephanie, thank you so much for chiming in. Good luck with your move to Appleton. Tarika and Deborah, thanks for coming on, even despite the technical difficulties. I'm so glad you guys chatted in the box. And Krista, thanks for joining the call. And then I also want to thank Jill, Liz, Stephanie, and Rachel, who I know popped on very quickly but is not on, I don't think, anymore. So everybody have a great day. Good luck with the end of the year, and we'll talk to you soon.